They smiled at me across the courtroom, looking exactly as they did before kicking me out at 18. They claimed this was protection, but their eyes only saw $3.8 billion. They did not know my grandfather had left a legal trap designed to shatter them if they took one greedy step. As the lawyer turned the page, my mother shifted, realizing the true shock was not the inheritance, but the proof of who really betrayed whom. My name is Harper Watson, and at 32 years old, I had learned that the most dangerous place in the world was not a dark alley or a war zone, but a mahogany conference table surrounded by family. The private viewing room at the Middlesex County Probate and Family Court in Massachusetts was designed to be neutral. The walls were a sterile, inoffensive beige, the lighting was recessed and humming with a low, headache-inducing buzz, and the air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt less like climate control and more like cryopreservation. It was clean. It was sharp. It felt exactly like a scalpel waiting to make an incision. I sat on one side of the heavy oval table. On the other side sat the people who had genetically contributed to my existence but had ceased to be my family 14 years ago. Mark Whitmore, my father, did not look like a man mourning the death of his own father. He looked like a CEO arriving at a quarterly review where the numbers were expected to be slightly volatile but ultimately manageable. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car, the fabric absorbing the harsh light rather than reflecting it. His tie was a somber navy, perfectly knotted, a visual signal of disciplined grief that never quite reached his eyes. When he looked at me, there was no softening, no flicker of recognition that his daughter was sitting 3 feet away after more than a decade of silence. Instead, I saw the same look he used to give an underperforming stock portfolio. He was assessing risk. He was calculating leverage. "Harper," he said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the indoor voice of the upper crust, modulated to sound reasonable even when delivering an execution order. "You look well, stable." He made the word stable sound like a question. Next to him sat Elaine, my mother. She was a vision of carefully curated sorrow. She wore black, of course, but it was a fashionable black, a silk blouse that draped elegantly over her shoulders. Her hair was lighter than I remembered, a chemically perfect blonde that refused to show age. As I took my seat, she had reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her skin was dry and cool. It felt like paper. "We were so worried you wouldn't come," she whispered, her eyes shimmering with tears that defied gravity by never actually falling. "This is all so heavy. Darling, just let us handle the heavy lifting today. You do not need this stress." It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. If I had been anyone else, I might have believed her. I might have believed that the squeeze of her hand was affection and not a restraint. But I knew the script. I knew that "let us handle it" was code for "give us the pen." And then there was Trent. My brother sat at the far end of their side of the table, leaning back in his leather chair with an air of bored entitlement that he had perfected by the age of 12. He was checking something on his phone, his thumb scrolling rhythmically, before he finally slid the device into his pocket and looked at me. There was no greeting. He just looked me up and down, taking in my off-the-rack blazer and the scuffed heels I had polished just that morning. His expression was not hostile. It was dismissive. He looked at me the way a developer looks at a plot of land he intends to bulldoze to build a parking structure. "Let us get this over with," Trent said, checking his watch. "I have a tea time at 4. At the head of the table sat Arthur Halstead, the senior partner of Rourke and Halstead. He was a man made of right angles and silence. He had been my grandfather's attorney for 40 years. He knew where all the bodies were buried because he had usually been the one to file the death certificates. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and placed a single, thick file on the table. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was the loudest noise in the room. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Russell Whitmore." "Mr. Halstead said. His voice was dry, like shifting sand. My father straightened his tie. My mother squeezed my hand harder, her nails digging slightly into my skin. They were ready. They had been ready for this moment for years, in their minds. Russell Whitmore's death was a sad biological event, but an excellent financial opportunity. They expected a standard distribution. They expected the bulk of the estate to flow to Mark, the only son, with perhaps a token trust for the grandchildren to ensure tax efficiency. I said nothing. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my breathing steady. I had spent the last 14 years building a life out of scraps, learning to survive in a world that did not care if I ate or starved. I had worked double shifts, taken night classes, and rented apartments where the heat worked only 50% of the time. I was not the scared 18-year-old girl they had thrown out of the house. I was something else entirely. But I let them see what they wanted to see. I let them see the victim. Mr. Whitmore was very specific in his instructions. Mr. Halstead continued. He opened the folder. The paper crackled. He was of sound mind and body when this document was drafted 6 months ago. The entirety of his liquid assets, real estate holdings, art collections, and diversified investment portfolios have been consolidated. Mark nodded slowly, an impatient gesture urging the lawyer to get to the number. The total valuation of the estate, Mr. Halstead read, his eyes lifting briefly to meet mine, is estimated at $3.8 billion. The number hung in the air. $3.8 billion. It was a staggering amount of money. It was enough to buy countries. It was enough to end wars or start them. But my parents did not gasp. They did not cry. A small, satisfied smile touched the corner of Mark's mouth. Elaine let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like relief. They were not mourning the loss of a father. They were celebrating the acquisition of a fortune. They had already spent it in their heads. They had already allocated the funds to shore up Mark's failing ventures and to fund Trent's lifestyle. Pursuant to Article 4 of the will, Mr. Halstead said, and here his voice dropped an octave, becoming harder, clearer. The entirety of this estate, including all assets, holdings, and the controlling interest in Whitmore Meridian Holdings, is bequeathed to his granddaughter, Harper Watson. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a vacuum, as if all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the room. Mark's smile froze. It did not fade naturally. It simply stopped working, leaving his face in a grotesque mask of pleasantry that no longer matched his eyes. Elaine's hand on mine went limp, then cold. She pulled it back as if I were suddenly contagious. Trent stopped leaning back. He sat up so fast his chair creaked. "Excuse me," he said. "Read that again." "I do not need to read it again, Trent, Mr. Halstead said, his tone bordering on boredom. "Sole beneficiary, Harper Watson." My father blinked. Once, twice, then the mask reassembled itself. The shock was replaced instantly by the mechanic gears of damage control. I could practically hear his brain whirring, recalculating the strategy. He turned to me, and the warmth in his eyes was so fake it was almost impressive. "Harper," Mark said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial register. "This is overwhelming. I know exactly how you feel right now." I looked at him. "Do you?" I asked. My voice was raspy. I had not spoken since entering the room. "Of course," Elaine chimed in, leaning forward again, though she did not touch me this time. $3.8 billion. It is a terrifying amount of responsibility. Sweetheart, it is a burden. Your grandfather, well, his mind was slipping at the end. We all knew that. He probably thought he was doing something kind, giving you a safety net." "A safety net," I repeated. "Exactly," Mark said, gaining confidence. He placed his hands flat on the table, creating a barrier between him and the lawyer. But he clearly did not understand the complexity of the tax implications, or the legal exposure. "Harper, you have been living simply. You have a job in compliance, correct? You rent a one-bedroom apartment. You are not equipped to manage a portfolio of this magnitude. It would destroy you." "It is too much pressure," Trent added, his voice sharp. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You would be a target. Harper, scammers, lawsuits, the media. You would not last a month. You would lose it all, or worse, end up in prison for tax evasion because you forgot to file a form." "We cannot let that happen," Elaine said softly, looking at the lawyer. "We have a duty to protect her." Mark nodded, turning his attention to Mr. Halstead. "Obviously, we will contest the competency of the decision later if needed, but let us keep this in the family for now to avoid a scandal. We can set up a blind trust. I will act as the primary trustee, with Trent as secondary. We will manage the assets, ensure the company remains stable, and issue Harper a generous monthly stipend. $50,000 a month, no. Let us make it $100,000, tax-free." He turned to me, smiling as if he were offering me the world. "You could quit your job, Harper. You could travel, buy a house. You would never have to worry about a bill again. We will take on the headache of the management. You just enjoy the life." "It is the only logical solution," Trent said, crossing his arms. "Temporary. Of course. Just until you get your bearings. Maybe in 10 or 15 years. We can revisit your involvement. 10 or 15 years. By then, the $3.8 billion would be funneled into their accounts, washed through shell companies, and I would be left with a stipend that they could cut off the moment I disobeyed. I looked at them. Really looked at them. I saw the fear behind Mark's eyes. It was not fear for me. It was fear of me. He was terrified that the money was sitting right there, within reach. But his hands were tied. He needed my signature. He needed my surrender. I remembered the day they kicked me out. I was 18. I had asked for tuition money for a state college. Mark had told me that money was for investments with return, and I was a liability. Elaine had stood by the window, drinking iced tea, and told me that the real world would teach me gratitude. Now, the real world sat between us in the form of a legal document. So, I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. You want to put the money in a trust, under your control. For your protection, Mark emphasized. We are family. Harper, who else can you trust? Family, I echoed. We just want what is best for you. Elaine pleaded. Please, darling, do not be stubborn. Do not let your pride ruin your future. Just sign the rights over to your father for now. Let him handle the lawyers. Mark reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gold fountain pen. He set it on the table and slid it toward me. It spun slowly on the polished wood, coming to a stop, pointing at my heart. Mr. Halstead can draft the transfer agreement right now, Mark said. It will take 5 minutes. Then we can go to dinner. Celebrate, being a family again. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at Mr. Halstead. The old lawyer had not moved. He had not spoken while my family pitched their trap. He sat with his hands folded over the file. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, but there was a glint in his eyes that reminded me of my grandfather. It was a look of anticipation. Mr. Halstead did not pick up the pen. He did not reach for a notepad to draft a trust agreement. Instead, he reached out and turned the page of the document he was reading. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot in the quiet room. Mark frowned. Arthur? Did you hear me? We are ready to proceed with the trust arrangement. Mr. Halstead looked up. He did not look at Mark. He looked at me. I am afraid that will not be possible, Mr. Halstead said. Why not? Trent snapped. She can agree to whatever she wants. She could, Mr. Halstead said. However, I have not finished reading the will. Mark froze. What do you mean? You said she is the sole beneficiary. I did, Mr. Halstead said. He tapped the paper with his index finger. But Mr. Whitmore was a man of foresight. He anticipated that there might be offers of assistance from family members. The air in the room changed. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. There are conditions, Mr. Halstead said. And there are consequences. He looked at my father, then at my mother, and finally at Trent. It was a look of clinical detachment, the look of a doctor diagnosing a terminal illness. I suggest you all sit back down, Mr. Halstead said softly. I have not closed the file yet. He paused, letting the words hang there. And believe me, he added, his eyes locking onto mine with a gravity that sent a shiver down my spine. This was only the opening statement. To understand why I did not flinch in that courtroom, you have to understand the house where I spent the first 18 years of my life. It was a sprawling estate in Connecticut, a place of manicured lawns and high ceilings where the air conditioning was always set to a crisp 68 degrees. It was beautiful in the way a hotel lobby is beautiful. Everything was white, beige, or gray. There were no crooked picture frames, no scuff marks on the baseboards, and absolutely no warmth. In the Whitmore household, love was not a feeling. It was a performance bonus. It was distributed quarterly, based on key performance indicators that my parents never wrote down but enforced with the ruthlessness of a private equity firm. Trent understood the system before he could even tie his shoes. My brother was the golden project. He was the asset my parents were betting the firm's future on. When Trent was 10, he threw a rock through the neighbor's greenhouse window. A normal parent might have been angry or embarrassed. Mark simply wrote a check for the damages and told the neighbor that Trent was displaying assertive dominance and testing boundaries. When Trent got a C in math, it was because the teacher lacked the pedagogical skills to engage a mind as advanced as his. When he got an A, he was a genius, a prodigy, the heir apparent. I watched this happen from the sidelines. I saw the new cars appear in the driveway for him the moment he turned 16. despite his driving record being a disaster. I saw the private tutors hired not to help him learn, but to do his homework for him so his transcript remained pristine. Trent was an investment that had to succeed, even if my parents had to manipulate the market to make it happen. I was different. I was not rebellious. I did not dye my hair pink or sneak out to parties. My crime was far worse in their eyes. I was observant, and I refused to pretend that the emperor was wearing clothes. I was the child who asked why we took 2 separate cars to the charity gala. I was the one who asked why mother smiled for the society photographers, but stopped speaking the moment the flashbulbs died down. I questioned the logic of their world. When I was 12, I asked my father why he fired the gardener who had been with us for a decade just to save a few $100s a month. Mark had looked at me over the top of his Wall Street Journal and said, "Harper, sentimentality is a leak in the hull of success. You plug the leak, or you sink." That was the dynamic. I was the leak. I was the inefficiency. Every conversation about my future was an exercise in dismissal. I remember sitting at the long marble kitchen island, my legs swinging, telling my mother I wanted to study history or maybe literature. I wanted to understand how the world worked, how people thought. Elaine would not look up from her tablet. She would just sip her kale smoothie and say, that is fine, I suppose. That is fine. It was the most crushing phrase in the English language. It meant I was permitted to exist, but I was not expected to matter. The turning point came 2 weeks after my high school graduation. I had been accepted into a good university, a state school that I was excited about because they had a great humanities program. I came home from a run one Tuesday afternoon to find Mark and Elaine sitting in the living room. They were not watching television. They were not reading. They were sitting in 2 wingback chairs, facing the sofa, waiting for me. It looked exactly like a board meeting where a difficult decision regarding personnel was about to be delivered. "Sit down, Harper," Mark said. I sat on the edge of the sofa, still wearing my running shoes. I could feel the sweat drying on my back, making me shiver in the chilled air. "We have been reviewing the family strategy," Mark began, steepling his fingers. He spoke with that same terrifying calm I would later hear in the lawyer's office. "Trent is heading to Wharton in the fall. The tuition and the networking costs are substantial. It is a significant capital outlay." "Okay," I said, confused. "That is great for Trent." "We have to prioritize our investments," Elaine added. She smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on her skirt. "We have decided that it is time for you to learn the value of independence." I looked between them. "I do not understand." Mark leaned forward slightly. "We are cutting you off, Harper, as of today. We believe that for someone of your temperament, the best teacher will be necessity. We are not paying for your university. We are not providing a stipend. You are 18. You are a legal adult." My breath hitched. "But Trent, you just bought him a condo near campus." "Trent requires a certain environment to flourish," Mark said, his voice hardening. "Trent is on a specific track. You have always been adrift. We are doing this for your own good. If you want a life, you need to build it yourself. We are not going to subsidize a lack of ambition." "I have ambition," I whispered. "I got into college." "State college," Elaine noted, her lip curling slightly. "It is hardly an asset to the family name." They did not yell. There were no thrown vases or slammed doors. It was a surgical amputation. They had looked at the balance sheet of their family, decided I was a non-performing asset, and liquidated me. "You have until the weekend to gather your things," Mark said, checking his watch. "I have a conference call in 10 minutes. He stood up and walked out of the room. He did not look back. Elaine gave me a small, tight smile, the kind you give a stranger on an elevator, and followed him. I sat there for an hour, listening to the silence of the house. I realized then that I wasn't being punished for something I did. I was being discarded for who I was. 2 days later, I left. I packed a single suitcase. I took my clothes, a few books, and the old laptop I had used for school. I did not take anything they had given me as a gift because I knew, instinctively, that those things came with strings I could no longer afford to hold. Walking out of that house felt like walking out of an airlock into deep space. I had no money. I had $0 in my pocket. I had to sell a pearl necklace my grandmother, my mother's mother, had given me just to pay the deposit on a room. The room was in a basement in a part of the city my mother would have only seen on the news. It smelled of damp drywall and frying oil from the apartment upstairs. The window looked out onto a brick wall. I slept on a mattress I found on the curb, which I scrubbed with bleach until my hands were raw. The next 4 years were a blur of exhaustion. I did not go to the university I had been accepted to. I could not afford the tuition. Instead, I went to community college at night. During the day, I worked as a waitress at a diner where the tips were mostly coins. I worked inventory at a warehouse, lifting boxes until my back felt like it was on fire. I learned to count every single dollar. I knew exactly how much a carton of eggs cost at 3 different stores. I knew that if I skipped lunch, I could afford the bus fare to get to the library to study. I learned that hunger is not a metaphor. It is a headache that never goes away, and a gnawing hollowness in your stomach that keeps you awake at night. I remember one Christmas Eve, 3 years after I left. I was working a double shift at the diner. It was snowing. Through the window, I saw a family walking by. They looked like my family. The father was in a camel haircoat, the mother in fur. The children looking bored and expensive. I watched them, and I waited for the anger to come. I waited to hate Mark and Elaine. I waited to hate Trent for taking the easy road while I was scrubbing grease off a counter, but the anger did not come. Instead, a cold, hard realization settled in my chest. They did not hate me. Hate implies passion. Hate implies that I mattered enough to provoke an emotional response. They simply did not care. To them, I was a bad stock. You do not hate a stock that drops in value. You just sell it and move on. They had erased me from their lives, not out of malice, but out of efficiency. I was a line item that had been deleted. That realization hurt more than any shouting match ever could. It meant that all those years, when I thought I was part of a family, I was just a guest who had overstayed her welcome. But it also freed me. If I was nothing to them, then I owed them nothing. Every dollar I earned was mine. Every grade I got was mine. Every time I survived another month of rent, it was my victory. I stopped waiting for them to call. I stopped waiting for them to save me. I realized that the only person coming to save Harper Watson was Harper Watson. On the day I finally left that house for the last time, with my suitcase handle digging into my palm, I had paused at the front door. I looked back into the foyer. The chandelier sparkled in the afternoon sun. The marble floor shone like a frozen lake. It was perfect. It was dead. I stepped out onto the porch. I did not slam the door. Slamming the door is a plea for attention. It is a noise you make when you want someone to chase you. I closed the door gently. The latch clicked into place with a soft, metallic sound. It was barely audible, just a tiny snick of metal against metal. But in the silence of that driveway, as I walked toward the gate without looking back, that soft click echoed like a gunshot. It was the sound of a vault locking. It was the sound of the end. And as I would find out 14 years later in a lawyer's office, it was the sound of the beginning. 3 months after I closed the door on my parents' house, my phone rang. I was sitting on the floor of my basement apartment, counting quarters to see if I had enough for laundry or if I would have to wash my uniform in the sink again. The number on the screen was blocked, but I answered it anyway, mostly out of a desperate hope that it might be a manager from one of the 10 places I had applied to that week. It was not a manager. It was a voice that sounded like gravel grinding against granite. "Be at the front of your building in 40 minutes, the voice said. "A car will pick you up." It was my grandfather, Russell Whitmore. I had not seen Russell in years. In the Whitmore family hierarchy, he was the distant peak of the mountain looming, often obscured by clouds, and unapproachable. He did not come to birthday parties. He did not attend graduations. He existed in the background of our lives as a force of nature, the source of the money that fueled Mark and Elaine's pretenses, but he rarely participated in the theater of it. 40 minutes later, a black sedan idled at the curb. The driver opened the door, and I slid into the back seat, clutching my purse like a shield. We drove out of the city, away from the grime and the noise, toward the quieter, older part of the state, where the driveways were long and the trees were ancient. Russell lived in a house that was the architectural opposite of my parents' pristine white mausoleum. His home was stone and dark wood, covered in ivy that looked like it was slowly trying to consume the structure. It smelled of rain and old paper. Russell was waiting for me in the dining room. He was a small man, physically, but he occupied space in a way that made him seem giant. He had eyes that were the color of steel wool, sharp and entirely devoid of the polite glaze my parents wore. He sat at the head of a long, dark table. There was no fanfare when I entered. He did not hug me. He did not say he missed me. He simply gestured to the chair to his right. "Sit," he said. I sat. A housekeeper placed a plate in front of me. It was roast chicken, potatoes, and green beans. Simple food, hot food. The steam rising from the plate hit my face, and my stomach let out a treacherous growl that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. I flushed, humiliated. Russell did not blink. He picked up his fork and knife. "Eat," he commanded. He did not ask me how I was. He did not ask why I was wearing a coat that was too thin for the weather, or why I looked like I had not slept in a week. He just ate, methodically and silently, giving me permission to do the same. I took a bite, then another, and then the dam broke. It was not a breakdown of tears, but a breakdown of exhaustion. The adrenaline that had been holding me together for 3 months simply evaporated. My shoulders slumped. I put the fork down because my hand was shaking too hard to hold it. I looked at him, and before I could stop myself, I told him everything. I told him about the meeting in the living room. I told him about Mark's cold calculation and Elaine's silence. I told him about the pearl necklace I sold. I told him about the basement with the damp walls. I vomited the truth onto the table, expecting him to be horrified, or perhaps to tell me that I must have misunderstood them. When I finished, the room was silent. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked a slow, heavy sound. Russell wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and set it down. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said. I stared at him, stunned. "Good?" "Yes," he said. His voice was flat, lacking any trace of sympathy. "Now you know who they are." He did not offer me a tissue. He did not reach out to pat my hand. He offered me something far more valuable: validation. He did not try to gaslight me into believing they loved me in their own way. He confirmed the reality I had been afraid to fully accept. "You have seen the face behind the mask," Russell continued, pouring himself a glass of water. "Most people spend their whole lives trying to earn the affection of people who view them as commodities. You have been liberated from that delusion at 18. It is a gift. Harper, a painful one, but a gift." That dinner changed the trajectory of my life. Russell did not invite me to move in. He did not offer to restore my allowance or pay my tuition at a private university. That would have been the easy way. And Russell Whitmore did not believe in the easy way. He believed in leverage. He covered my rent for the basement apartment. He set up an account at a local grocery store so I could buy food without looking at the price tags. But he made it clear this was not charity. "I am investing in your stability," he told me one afternoon in his study. "You cannot think strategically when you are hungry. You cannot plan a future when you are terrified of the present. I am removing the panic so you can use your brain." In exchange for this stability, he demanded my time. Every Sunday, I went to his house. We did not talk about feelings. We played chess. I hated chess at first. I played emotionally. I wanted to take his pieces. I wanted to win. Russell destroyed me every single time. He would trap my king in 10 moves, his face impassive. "You are reacting," he would say, resetting the board. "You are looking at my hand. Stop looking at the hand. Look at the board. Look at what I am not doing." "I am trying," I would argue. "No," he would counter. "You are projecting what you want me to do. You want me to take that pawn so you can move your knight. But I am not going to take the pawn. I am going to let it sit there until it blocks your own escape route. Never assume your opponent is playing the game you want them to play." Over the years, the lessons seeped into my bones. I stopped looking for the immediate victory. I learned the value of the long game. I learned that sometimes you have to let a bishop die to save the queen. Russell never spoke about Mark or Elaine directly. He never insulted them, but his silence was a verdict. When I mentioned that Trent had crashed another car and Mark had covered it up, Russell would just stare at the chessboard, his jaw tightening slightly. He knew. He saw everything. He saw the waste. He saw the arrogance. And in his silence, I realized that he was not just disappointed in his son. He was done with him. With Russell's guidance, I found my footing. I finished my degree in business administration, graduating at the top of my class, not because I was a genius like Trent was supposed to be, but because I worked harder than anyone else. I landed a job at a firm called Northgate Compliance Group. It was not a glamorous job. It was not the kind of career that gets you on the cover of magazines. My role was to analyze corporate risk, to read the fine print of contracts that were designed to hide liability. I spent my days hunting for the details that everyone else missed. I learned to spot the loopholes, the vague language, the traps buried in paragraph 42. I loved it. It was like chess, but with higher stakes. Russell was proud. In his own way. When I told him I had been promoted to senior analyst, he nodded once. "Compliance," he mused. "Good. You are learning where the bodies are buried. That is where the real power lies. Not in the handshake, but in the paperwork." As the years went by, Russell grew older. His movements slower, but his mind remained a razor. Our Sunday dinners became the anchor of my existence. I was building a modest, quiet life that belonged entirely to me. I had my own apartment above ground this time, and a car that I paid for myself. I owed nothing to anyone, except the loyalty I held for the old man sitting across the chessboard. But as his health began to decline, the tone of our conversations shifted. He started asking me questions that felt hypothetical, almost like scenarios from a textbook. "Harper," he said one evening, moving his rook to threaten my queen. "If a man offers you a shield, but he is holding a dagger behind his back, what do you do?" I frowned, studying the board. "I do not take the shield. I step back." "Wrong," Russell said sharply. "If you step back, he throws the dagger. You take the shield, but you do not lower your guard. You use the shield to break his arm." I looked up at him. His eyes were intense, burning with an urgency I did not understand at the time. Another time, when he was bedridden and I was sitting by his side reading a report from Northgate, he interrupted me. "If they try to manage you," he rasped, his voice weak but clear. "If they try to tell you that you are too young, or too emotional, or too inexperienced to handle power, what will you say?" "I would tell them to go to hell," I said, closing the file. Russell shook his head slowly against the pillow. "No, emotion is a weakness. You do not tell them to go to hell. You let them think you are listening. You let them think they are winning. You let them walk right up to the edge of the cliff, and then you let gravity do the work." I held his hand. It was frail now, the skin translucent. "Grandpa, why are you asking me this? Who are you talking about?" He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "You know who? They are vultures. Harper, they are circling. They think the carcass is already theirs. They do not know I have given the lion the keys to the kingdom." He pulled me closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I have written a script. Harper, I have set the board. But you are the one who has to make the moves. I can give you the pieces, but I cannot move them for you. Promise me something." "Anything," I whispered. "Do not let them make you doubt your own eyes," he said. "When the time comes, they will try to gaslight you. They will try to rewrite history. They will use your own trauma against you. Do not let them. You know who they are. Never forget that." "I won't," I promised. He relaxed then, closing his eyes. "Good. Now, go home. You have work tomorrow at Northgate. Read the contracts, find the loopholes, practice." I left him that night with a heavy feeling in my chest. I did not know that it was the last time we would speak properly. I did not know that he was not just giving me advice. He was giving me the rehearsal for the performance of my life. He was preparing me for the courtroom. He was preparing me for the trust document. He knew Mark would try to take control. He knew Trent would call me incompetent. He knew Elaine would play the loving mother. Russell Whitmore had spent the last 10 years playing a game of chess against his own family, and he had just passed the final move to me. I walked out to my car, the night air cool against my face. I looked back at the house, dark and silent against the sky. I did not know about the $3.8 billion then. I did not know about the controlling interest in the company. All I knew was that the only person who had ever truly seen me was fading away, and he had left me with a warning that felt more like a weapon. "Good," his voice echoed in my memory. "Now you know who they are." I got into my car and drove away, unaware that the game had already begun. The phone call that ended the only meaningful relationship I had left in the world did not come in the middle of the night. It came at 10 in the morning, on a Tuesday. While I was reviewing a compliance audit for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company, my phone buzzed against the hard laminate of my desk. When I saw the name of Russell's private physician, the world around me seemed to stop spinning. He was gone. It was a heart attack. Quick, massive, painless. Or so the doctor assured me. I did not scream. I did not collapse. I simply thanked the doctor, hung up the phone, and stared at the blinking cursor on my computer screen for a long time. The grief did not hit me like a wave. It settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Russell had been my silent anchor. In a sea of sharks, he had been the only solid ground I had ever known. He was the only person who looked at me and saw Harper. The person, not Harper. The failed investment. For the next 3 days, I moved through life like a ghost. I went to work because I did not know what else to do. I sat in my apartment and stared at the empty chair where he would never sit. I did not expect an inheritance. The thought never even crossed my mind. The Whitmore money was a poison I had built an immunity to by staying far away from the source. If I hoped for anything, it was small, sentimental. Maybe he had left me the ivory chess set we used to play with on Sundays. Maybe a letter. Maybe just a note saying he was proud of me. I wanted a piece of him to hold on to. Something that proved I had existed in his world. Then came the summons. Arthur Halstead, the attorney, contacted me with a formal politeness that chilled my blood. The reading of the will was scheduled for Friday at the offices of Rourke and Halstead. Attendance was mandatory. I arrived 15 minutes early. The law firm was located in a glass tower downtown, the kind of building designed to make you feel small before you even stepped into the elevator. I wore my best suit, a navy blue blazer and matching trousers I had bought on sale 2 years ago. It was professional, crisp, and completely inadequate for the battlefield I was about to enter. When the receptionist led me into the main conference room, I realized I had walked into a trap. They were already there. Mark, Elaine, and Trent were seated along one side of the massive mahogany table. They looked immaculate. Mark was wearing a bespoke suit that probably cost more than my car. Elaine was draped in black silk, wearing pearls that caught the light, looking less like a widow mourning a father-in-law and more like a socialite attending a fundraising gala for a tragic cause. Trent sat with one ankle resting on his knee, scrolling through his phone, looking bored. The moment I stepped in, the atmosphere shifted. It was as if the air conditioning had been turned down to freezing. Elaine was the first to move. She stood up and floated toward me, her arms open. It was a performance. I could see the calculation in her eyes, checking to see if the lawyer was watching. "Harper," she breathed, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive perfume. "Oh, you poor thing. You look exhausted." She pulled back, her hands gripping my shoulders. Her grip was tight, possessing. "I told Mark we should have sent a car for you. This is all so much. You must be in shock. Just let Mom handle everything today. Okay? You do not need to worry about a single thing." I gently removed her hands from my shoulders. "I am fine, Mother." "She is clearly not fine," Mark said from the table. He did not stand up. He gestured to the empty chair opposite them. "Sit down. Harper, let us get this over with. We have a lot of administrative work to do after Arthur reads the document." I took my seat. The table was wide, a physical chasm separating me from them. Mr. Halstead entered the room a moment later. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and aged in a library. He carried a leather folio, which he placed on the table with deliberate precision. He sat down at the head, adjusted his glasses, and looked at each of us in turn. "Thank you all for coming," he said. His voice was dry and devoid of emotion. "We are here to execute the final instructions of Mr. Russell Whitmore." "Arthur," Mark interrupted smoothly, leaning forward. "Before we begin, I just want to state for the record that the family is united. We know Father's health was failing. We are prepared to handle the transition of the estate seamlessly. I have already spoken to the board at Whitmore Meridian regarding the voting shares." Mr. Halstead looked at Mark over the rim of his glasses. "The board will be notified of the new ownership structure in due time. Mr. Whitmore, for now, please let me read the will." Mark nodded, leaning back with a confident smirk. He thought he knew what was coming. They all did. They assumed Russell had left the bulk of the estate to Mark, perhaps skipping a generation to Trent for tax purposes, with maybe a token cash gift for me to assuage any guilt. Mr. Halstead opened the folio. "I, Russell Whitmore, being of sound mind," he began. I tuned out the legal boilerplate. I was watching my family. Elaine was checking her reflection in the back of a spoon on the coffee service tray. Trent was stifling a yawn. Mark was tapping his finger on the table, impatient to get to the numbers. Then, Mr. Halstead got to the assets. "To my son, Mark Whitmore, and my daughter-in-law, Elaine Whitmore, I leave my collection of vintage automobiles and the vacation property in the Hamptons." Mark frowned slightly. That was a fraction of the estate. "To my grandson, Trent Whitmore, I leave the sum of $5 million. Trent's head snapped up. $5 million? That is it. That does not even cover my capital calls for the next 2 quarters. "Silence," Mr. Halstead commanded. He did not look up from the paper. "As for the remainder of my estate," Mr. Halstead continued, his voice steady, "including the entirety of my liquid assets, my investment portfolios, my real estate holdings in New York, London, and Tokyo, and the controlling 51% stake in Whitmore Meridian Holdings, total valuation estimated at $3.8 billion. The room went deathly silent. Mark stopped tapping his finger. Elaine froze. I bequeath this entirety, Mr. Halstead read, to my granddaughter, Harper Watson. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. Then, the explosion happened. Not a shouting match, but a sudden, frantic realignment of reality. Mark let out a short, sharp laugh. Well, that is unexpected, but obviously, Father was making a point. He turned his gaze on me. It was the same look a wolf gives a wounded deer. Harper, 3.8 billion. My God. It is absurd, Trent muttered, staring at me with open hostility. She rents a 1-bedroom apartment. She drives a 10-year-old sedan. Giving her that kind of capital is not a gift. It is a weapon. She will blow it or get scammed in a week. 3.8 billion is not a joke. Harper. Trent is right, Elaine said, her voice trembling with faux concern. Harper, darling, look at you. You are shaking. This is too much pressure. Your grandfather, he loved you. But he was clearly not thinking about the practicalities. You cannot run a conglomerate. You work in compliance, for heaven's sake. I do, I said quietly. I assess risk. Mark waved his hand dismissively. Exactly. You look at paperwork. You do not steer the ship. But listen. Do not panic. We are here. We are not going to let you drown. He stood up and began to pace, his confidence returning as he formulated a plan. Here is what we do. Arthur, draw up a trusteeship immediately. I will serve as the executor and primary trustee. We will place the assets in a blind trust to protect Harper from liability. We will give her a generous allowance, enough to buy a nice house, travel, whatever she wants, but the voting rights and the capital management remain with the adults. I am 32, I said. I am an adult. You are inexperienced, Mark shot back, his mask slipping just a fraction. This is finance. Harper, this is sharks and blood in the water. You would be eaten alive before lunch. We are doing this to protect you. It is the only way, Trent added, leaning across the table. You sign the papers. Harper, you take the cash and you go live your little life. Leave the heavy lifting to us, unless you want to destroy everything grandfather built. They were not shocked that I got the money. They were arrogant enough to believe that ownership was just a technicality. They believed that because I was quiet, I was weak. They believed that because I had walked away 14 years ago, I would walk away now. They saw me as a conduit, a temporary vessel for the money before it flowed back to its rightful owners them. Mr. Halstead cleared his throat. It was a dry, scratching sound. Mr. Whitmore, the lawyer said, I believe you are premature in your planning. Premature, Mark scoffed. I am being pragmatic. She cannot handle this. We are the family. We are taking control. Draft the papers. Arthur. Mr. Halstead did not reach for a pen. He did not look at his legal pad. Instead, with a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to take an hour, he reached for the top corner of the document he was reading. Crinkle. The sound of the page turning was crisp and loud in the silent room. Mark stopped pacing. Arthur, what are you doing? I gave you an instruction. You have no authority to give me instructions. Mark, Mr. Halstead said, his voice dropping to a register that was pure steel. And I have not finished reading the will. What else could there be? Elaine asked, her voice shrill. He gave her everything. We are just trying to fix the mess. Mr. Halstead looked up. His eyes met mine. There was a flicker of something in them, a shared secret, a spark of the old man's fire. Russell anticipated that you would offer to fix the mess, Mr. Halstead said. He anticipated that you would try to establish a trust. He anticipated that you would claim Harper was incompetent. Trent let out a nervous laugh. Okay, so the old man was paranoid. So what? Mr. Halstead smoothed the new page flat with his hand. There are additional clauses. Mr. Halstead said softly. Specific conditions regarding the administration of the estate and the conduct of the family members. He looked at Trent, then at Mark. And I suggest you listen very carefully, the lawyer added, because these next paragraphs determine whether you leave this room with your $5 million and your Hamptons house, or if you leave with absolutely nothing. Trent's smirk vanished. It didn't fade. It was extinguished, like a light bulb shattering. The arrogance drained out of Mark's face, replaced by a sudden, dawning horror. Read it, I said. It was the first time I had given an order in that room. Mr. Halstead adjusted his glasses and began to read. The movement was small, precise, and terrifyingly calm against the backdrop of my family's rising panic. He did not look at Mark, whose face had flushed a deep, unhealthy crimson. He did not look at Elaine, who was gripping her pearl necklace as if it were a rosary. He looked only at the document before him, treating the words with the reverence of a holy text. Article 7, Section B, Mr. Halstead read, his voice filling the room like cement pouring into a foundation. The anti-interference protocol. The what? Trent snapped. That is not a legal term. It is a term defined within this instrument. Mr. Halstead replied without looking up. I quote, I, Russell Whitmore, being aware of the predatory nature of corporate governance and familial pressure, hereby stipulate that the inheritance of Harper Watson is conditional upon her absolute and autonomous control. Any attempt by Mark Whitmore, Elaine Whitmore, or Trent Whitmore to assume guardianship, power of attorney, or conservatorship over Harper Watson, or to place these assets into a trust not solely created and managed by Harper Watson herself, shall be interpreted as a direct violation of my wishes. Mark slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed violently, making the water pitcher rattle. This is insane. You cannot legislate family concern. We are her parents. If she is incapable of managing $3.8 billion, the court has a duty to intervene. Mr. Halstead looked up then. He removed his glasses slowly. Russell anticipated you would say exactly that, Mark, which brings us to the mirror clause. The mirror clause, Elaine whispered, the color draining from her face. She looked like she was about to faint, but I knew she was calculating the odds. It is a triggered mechanism. Mr. Halstead explained, his tone conversational, as if he were explaining the weather. Russell spent the last 5 years of his life documenting the internal operations of the family and the business. He compiled a dossier, bank transfers, emails, recorded conversations, and unauthorized uses of his personal credit lines. He tapped a thick, red-sealed envelope that had been sitting on the corner of his desk, unnoticed until now. This is the mirror file, Halstead said. If any member of the Whitmore family files a petition for guardianship or attempts to challenge Harper Watson's competency in a court of law, this file is automatically unsealed. And goes where? Mark asked, his voice tight. Copies will be sent immediately to the board of directors of Whitmore Meridian Holdings. Halstead listed, ticking them off on his fingers. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the Internal Revenue Service, and, of course, the District Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had landed but had not yet detonated. Mark stared at the red envelope. I saw a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. I did not know what was in that file, but judging by the look in my father's eyes, it was enough to bury him. This is blackmail, Trent hissed, standing up. You are blackmailing us from the grave. It is not blackmail, Trent, Halstead corrected gently. It is a deterrent. It is a nuclear option designed to ensure peace. If you leave Harper alone, the file stays sealed forever. If you try to take her voice, the file speaks for her. She is not stable, Mark shouted, losing his composure completely. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Look at her. She has been estranged for 14 years. She lives in a hovel. She has no idea how to handle wealth. She is mentally fragile. Russell was senile if he thought she could handle this. Thank you, Mark, Halstead said, picking up a pen and making a small note on his pad. You have just perfectly demonstrated why the clause was necessary. He was not senile, I said. My voice was quiet, but in the acoustic perfection of the conference room, it carried, he beat me at chess 3 days before he died. He was influenced, Elaine cried out, pivoting her strategy instantly. She looked at the lawyer, her eyes wide and pleading. Arthur, you know he was not himself in the end. The medication, the isolation, he was easily manipulated. We can prove undue influence. We will challenge the will on the grounds of capacity. Mr. Halstead sighed, a long, weary sound. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a USB drive. Russell underwent a full psychiatric evaluation on the morning he signed this will, Halstead said, recorded on video, witnessed by 3 independent board-certified psychiatrists and a notary. He lists the current president, the price of gold, and explains in detail exactly why he is cutting you out of the management of his estate. He specifically mentions that Elaine would blame his medication. Elaine's mouth snapped shut. If you contest the will, Halstead continued, turning his gaze to Trent, who was vibrating with rage. You trigger the no contest provision. If you lose, and you will lose, Given the video evidence, you forfeit everything: the $5 million, the Hamptons house, your access to the Whitmore Family Trust for education and healthcare. You will be walked out of this building with nothing but the clothes on your back. Trent froze. $5 million was a pittance compared to the billions, but it was $5 million more than zero. He sat back down slowly, his face pale. "So that is it?" Mark asked, his voice low and dangerous. "We are held hostage. She gets the money, and we have to sit by and watch her destroy the company." "It is not just the money, Mark," Halstead said. "We have not discussed the equity structure." Mark blinked. "The equity follows the estate. I know that, but I am the CEO. I run the company. She might own the shares, but I control the board." Mr. Halstead turned the page again. "Article 9, he read. "Regarding the governance of Whitmore Meridian Holdings, Russell Whitmore hereby transfers his Class A supervoting shares solely to Harper Watson." Mark looked like he had been punched in the gut. "No, that is impossible. Class A shares have 10-to-1 voting rights. That gives her 51% of the voting power," Halstead finished. "Harper Watson is not just the owner of the assets. Mark, she is the controlling shareholder. She can dissolve the board. She can veto mergers. And by effectively immediately, she is your boss." The room spun. I gripped the armrests of my chair to keep from floating away. I owned the company. The company Mark had sacrificed his marriage, his children, and his soul to climb to the top of. Mark stared at me. For the first time, there was no condescension in his eyes. There was only fear, pure, unadulterated fear. He realized that the daughter he had discarded like a broken toy now held the power to fire him. "Harper," Mark said. His voice was unrecognizable. It was soft, desperate. "Harper, listen to me. You do not know the business. The merger with Asian Pacific Logistics is next week. If you signal instability, the stock will crash. You need me. You need my guidance." "We can help you," Elaine added, leaning in, though she was careful not to touch me this time. "We can teach you. We can form a council. Just sign a proxy. Darling, just a simple proxy giving your father the voting rights for a year, just until you learn the ropes." I looked at them. I looked at Trent, who was terrified of losing his allowance. I looked at Elaine, who was terrified of losing her social standing. I looked at Mark, who was terrified of losing his power. They were not asking for a proxy to help me. They were asking for the keys to the handcuffs Russell had put on them. I stood up. The movement was sudden enough that Mark flinched. I smoothed my skirt. I picked up my purse. I looked at the three strangers sitting across from me. "So," I said. My voice was steady. It sounded like Russell's voice. "Let me understand this clearly. You want me to sign a proxy?" "Yes," Mark breathed, seeing a glimmer of hope. "Exactly. For the stability of the company." "And you want to manage the money in a trust?" I asked. "To protect you?" Elaine nodded eagerly. "Only to protect you." I looked Mark dead in the eye. "Are you asking because you want to help me?" I asked. "Or are you asking because you want to hold the pen?" Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He could not lie, not with the mirror file sitting on the desk just a few feet away. "I think we both know the answer," I said. "Mr. Halstead, I accept the inheritance as written. I do not consent to any trusts. I do not grant any proxies." "Understood," Halstead said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Harper, wait." Mark stood up, knocking his chair over. "You are making a mistake. You are declaring war." "No, father," I said, turning to the door. "I am ending one." I walked out of the conference room. I did not look back. I heard Trent swearing, and I heard Elaine sobbing, but the sounds were muffled, as if they were coming from underwater. Mr. Halstead followed me out. We stood in the quiet of the hallway, the heavy oak door closing behind us, sealing the noise of my family inside. The lawyer looked different out here. Less like an executioner. More like a tired old man who had just finished a marathon. "You did well," he said quietly. "I feel like I'm going to throw up," I admitted, leaning against the wall. "That is a normal reaction to acquiring $3.8 billion and 3 enemies in the span of an hour," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, plain white envelope. It was not sealed with wax. It looked ordinary. "Russell wanted you to have this," Halstead said. "He told me to give it to you only after the family showed their true colors. If they had been happy for you, if they had been supportive, I was instructed to burn it." I took the envelope. It felt light. "He knew," I whispered. He knew exactly what they would do. He knew people, Halstead corrected. He was a master of patterns, and your family follows a very predictable pattern. He placed a hand on my shoulder. There is a car waiting for you downstairs. Go home, Harper. Do not answer your phone. Do not open your door. Read the letter, and tomorrow, the real work begins. What is in it? I asked, looking at the envelope. I do not know, Halstead said. It is the only document Russell wrote that I did not review. He said it was the final instruction, but he said it was for your eyes only. I nodded and walked toward the elevator. The ride down to the lobby felt like falling. I clutched the envelope to my chest. I walked out of the building into the bright sunlight of Boston. The city was moving, noisy and chaotic, completely unaware that a new billionaire had just walked onto the pavement. I got into the back of the car Halstead had arranged. As we pulled away, I looked down at the envelope in my lap. On the front, in Russell's shaky, spidery handwriting, were 3 words: open when alone. I took a deep breath. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. I was trembling because for the first time in my life, I held a weapon that my family could not take away from me. I did not know it then, but inside that envelope was not just advice, it was a map, and it pointed directly to the skeletons my father had buried deep beneath the foundation of Whitmore Meridian. The ceasefire lasted exactly 14 days. I spent those 2 weeks inside my apartment, surrounded by boxes of files Russell had left me, trying to map the labyrinth of his empire. I felt like a student cramming for an exam that would determine whether I lived or died. I ignored the news. I ignored the stock ticker. I thought that if I stayed quiet, if I showed no aggression, the family might retreat to their corners to lick their wounds. I was naive. I had forgotten that a cornered animal does not retreat. It attacks. The attack arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a process server. He was a bored-looking man in a windbreaker who caught me just as I was bringing in my recycling bin. He handed me a thick envelope, muttered a legal disclaimer, and walked away before I could even blink. I opened the envelope in my kitchen. The header was from the Massachusetts Family Court. Petition for emergency temporary guardianship. Petitioner Mark Whitmore. Subject Harper Watson. I read the filing, my hands trembling not with fear, but with a cold, vibrating rage. The document painted a portrait of a woman I did not recognize. It claimed that the sudden acquisition of $3.8 billion had caused me acute psychological distress. It cited my history of isolation and estrangement from support systems as evidence that I was susceptible to manipulation by unscrupulous third parties. It argued that I lacked the executive capacity to manage complex assets and that, for my own safety, the court should appoint a temporary guardian to oversee the estate while I underwent a mandated wellness evaluation. The guardian they suggested was, of course, Mark Whitmore. They were not trying to take the money away from me directly. That would trigger the mirror clause. Instead, they were trying to take me away from the money. They were trying to declare me mentally unfit, effectively turning me into a child in the eyes of the law. I called Arthur Halstead immediately. I have the papers, he said before I could speak. His voice was clipped. They are trying to thread a needle. Harper, they are arguing that this is not a contest of the will, but a protective measure for a beneficiary in crisis. It is a desperate move, but a dangerous one. It is a lie, I said. It is a narrative, Halstead corrected, and unfortunately, they are already selling it to the public. I turned on the television. I did not own a cable subscription, but I pulled up the local news stream on my laptop. There was my mother. Elaine was standing at a podium at the Beacon Hill Charity Gala. She looked stunning in emerald green, the picture of maternal grace. She was not speaking about the charity. She was answering a reporter's question about the rumors regarding the Whitmore estate. We are just asking for privacy right now, Elaine said, her voice catching perfectly in her throat. She dabbed her eye with a tissue. Our daughter. She is overwhelmed. Who wouldn't be? Imagine being thrust into this spotlight after living such a quiet, fragile life. We just want to bring her home. We just want to make sure she is safe until she is herself again. It was masterful. She did not say I was crazy. She said I was fragile. She framed their greed as a rescue mission. Simultaneously, the financial blogs began to light up. I watched the headlines scroll by on my screen. Is the Whitmore heir up to the task? Sources say new billionaire is reclusive and over her head. Investors worry about leadership vacuum at Whitmore Meridian. Trent. This had Trent's fingerprints all over it. He was leaking blind items to his contacts on Wall Street. He was poisoning the well. creating an atmosphere of uncertainty so that the board of directors would panic and back Mark's bid for guardianship just to stabilize the stock price. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go on Twitter and post a video of myself reading a balance sheet. I wanted to drive to that gala and scream at Elaine in front of the cameras. "Do not engage," Halstead warned me. "That is what they want. If you lash out, you look unstable. If you cry, you look weak. If you yell, you look hysterical. You have to be a statue. Harper, ice and stone." So I went dark. I hired a private security firm. Using the funds Russell had made available to me, I had them sweep my apartment for bugs. I had them install encrypted servers for my communications. I felt paranoid, but then, paranoia is just a heightened state of awareness when people are actually out to get you. 3 days before the hearing, my security consultant, a woman named Valdez, who spoke in short, efficient sentences, called me. "Someone tried to access your primary banking profile last night," she said. "Did they get in?" I asked, gripping the phone. "No, we have two-factor authentication on everything, but they had your social security number, your mother's maiden name, and the exact balance of your checking account from 4 years ago. It was a targeted attempt to reset your credentials." "It was them," I said. "We traced the IP address," Valdez said. "It bounced through a VPN, but they got sloppy. For a split second, the connection dropped to a static IP. It originated from a coffee shop 3 blocks from Trent Whitmore's penthouse." "Keep the log," I said. "Send it to Halstead." I sat back, rubbing my temples. They were getting reckless. Why Mark and Trent were greedy. Yes, but they were usually calculated. This level of aggression felt frantic. They were not just trying to get the money. They were trying to get it now. The answer came the next afternoon in the form of a man I had never met. His name was David. He contacted me through an encrypted email address I had set up for whistleblowers, a channel Halstead had suggested. David claimed to be a former analyst for Mark's private investment firm. He wanted to meet. I met him in a public library, in the back corner of the periodicals section. He was young, nervous, and kept checking the door. "I signed a non-disclosure agreement," he whispered, pushing a folder across the table toward me. "If he finds out I am talking to you, he will sue me into oblivion." "Why are you helping me?" I asked, keeping my hand on the folder. "Because I respected your grandfather," David said. "And because Mark is going to crash the plane if someone does not take the controls." I opened the folder. It was a financial autopsy of a deal called Project Oakhaven. "What is this?" I asked. "It was a real estate development in Dubai." David explained. "Mark bet big on it 2 years ago. He leveraged his personal assets. He borrowed against his future inheritance. He convinced 3 of his friends to put in $10 million each. And the deal is dead," David said. "The developers went bankrupt last month. The money is gone. Mark is personally liable for nearly $300 million in debt. The margin calls are starting. If he does not get access to the Whitmore estate liquidity within 30 days, he is insolvent. He is not just fighting for power. Harper, he is fighting to stay out of prison for fraud." I stared at the numbers. The red ink was staggering. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The desperation, the temporary guardianship. Mark did not need to control the company forever. He just needed control long enough to raid the coffers, pay off his debts, and bury the evidence of his failure. "Thank you," I said, tucking the folder into my bag. "You have no idea what you just did." "Watch your back," David said, standing up. "He is drowning. A drowning man will pull anyone down with him to get a breath of air." The hearing was held on a Thursday. The courtroom was smaller than the one where the will was read, but it felt more claustrophobic. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and tension. Mark sat with his legal team, looking somber and concerned. Elaine was in the gallery, wiping her eyes, playing the grieving mother to perfection. Trent was absent, presumably busy shredding documents or leaking more lies. Mark's lawyer, a man named Sterling who had a smile like a razor blade, stood up first. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice smooth and persuasive. "This is a tragedy. We have a young woman, Harper Watson, who has lived a life of obscurity. Suddenly, she is burdened with an empire. We have affidavits from family friends stating she has been withdrawn. We have reports that she has barricaded herself in her apartment. She refuses to speak to her parents. These are signs of a mental break. Mr. Whitmore is simply asking for a temporary conservatorship to ensure the assets and his daughter are protected until she stabilizes." The judge, a stern woman with gray hair, looked at me. I sat next to Halstead. my hands folded on the table. I wore a gray suit. I wore no makeup. I looked boring. I looked boringly sane. Ms. Watson, the judge said, do you have a response? I nodded to Halstead. He stood up. Your Honor, Halstead said, we do not deny that Ms. Watson has been cautious. However, caution is not insanity. In the world of high finance, caution is a survival trait. The petitioner claims she is being manipulated. Sterling interrupted. That she is isolated. She is isolated because she is under siege, Halstead countered, and we have evidence to prove that the concern shown by the petitioner is nothing more than a predatory attempt to bypass the conditions of the decedent's will. Halstead walked to the bench and handed over a binder. Exhibit A, Halstead said. An email chain between Mark Whitmore and his public relations firm, dated 3 days after the funeral. Subject line, narrative control. In this email, Mr. Whitmore instructs the firm to, and I quote, paint her as overwhelmed and fragile. He asks for talking points to use at charity events. I watched Mark's spine stiffen. Elaine stopped dabbing her eyes. Exhibit B, Halstead continued, his voice rising slightly. A text message sent from Trent Whitmore to a member of the Whitmore Meridian Board of Directors. It reads, do not worry about the girl. She is a temporary obstacle. We will have the signature power back in a month. The judge flipped through the binder, her eyebrows lifting. And finally, Halstead said, dropping the bomb David had given me. Exhibit C, a forensic accounting of Mark Whitmore's personal liabilities. It appears the petitioner is currently facing $300 million in immediate debt obligations. A guardianship would give him access to the very funds he needs to save himself from bankruptcy. Objection, Sterling shouted, jumping up. That is irrelevant. My client's personal finances have nothing to do with his daughter's mental health. It goes to motive, Your Honor, Halstead said calmly. They are not trying to save her. They are trying to loot her. The judge looked at Mark. He was pale, his composure cracking. He looked like the drowning man David had described. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, her voice icy. This court is for family matters, not corporate raids. If these documents are authentic, your client has come dangerously close to committing perjury regarding his motivations. They are contextual, Sterling stammered. They are damning, the judge corrected. The petition for temporary guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing Mark Whitmore and Trent Whitmore from contacting Ms. Watson or accessing any financial instruments related to the estate pending a full review. She banged her gavel. The sound was the sweetest thing I had ever heard. I stood up. I did not smile. I did not cheer. I simply gathered my papers. Mark was staring at the table, his hands clenched into fists. He knew I had the leverage now. He knew I knew about the debt. I walked out of the courtroom, Halstead flanking me like a bodyguard. In the hallway, the press was waiting. But before they could swarm, Elaine stepped into my path. She looked frantic now. The mask of the grieving mother was slipping, revealing the desperate woman underneath. She reached out, grabbing my arm before Halstead could intervene. Harper, she hissed, her voice trembling. You do not understand what you are doing. You are destroying him. He is your father. He is a debtor, I said, pulling my arm away. And he tried to have me declared insane. We were trying to protect you, Elaine cried, tears finally spilling over, though I could not tell if they were for me or for the lifestyle she was about to lose. The world is dangerous. Harper, we just wanted to shield you. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had watched me pack my bags at 18 and hadn't said a word. I looked at the woman who smiled for the cameras while I counted pennies in a basement. No, Mother, I said, my voice loud enough for the reporters near the door to hear. You did not want to protect me. You wanted to protect your control. I turned my back on her. And just so we are clear, I added over my shoulder, the temporary obstacle is now permanent. I walked out into the daylight, the flashbulbs blinding me, but I didn't blink. I had won the battle, but I knew the war was far from over. Mark was desperate, and desperate men do not stop, they escalate. The $3.8 billion was not a pile of gold sitting in a vault like something out of a cartoon. It was a living, breathing beast. It was a sprawling, tangled nervous system of holding companies, offshore trusts, voting blocks, and assets that existed only as lines of code on a secure server. For the first week after the court victory, I did not sleep. I lived on black coffee and the adrenaline of survival. I was still in my apartment. the one with the laminate flooring and the view of the brick wall. But the inside had changed. I had replaced my flimsy door lock with a biometric security system. I had Valdez, my security consultant, stationed in the lobby. I wasn't buying yachts or diamonds. I was buying a fortress. I sat at my kitchen table, which was buried under stacks of documents. This was the unglamorous reality of being a billionaire. It was homework. Endless, high-stakes homework. I finally reached for the white envelope Russell had left me, the one marked, "Open when alone." My hands were steady as I slit the paper. I expected a letter. I expected some final words of wisdom about life or family or forgiveness. There was no letter. Inside was a single flash drive and a small index card with a sequence of numbers written on it. A login key. I plugged the drive into my encrypted laptop. A window popped up, demanding the key. I typed in the numbers. The screen filled with folders. The first one was titled, "The Rot." I clicked it. It wasn't a sentimental goodbye. It was a crime scene map. Russell had not been oblivious in his final years. He had been watching. He had hired a forensic accounting firm 3 years ago, a boutique agency that specialized in corporate espionage. They had been tracking Mark and Trent, not as family members, but as hostile internal threats. I opened a file dated 18 months ago. It detailed a series of wire transfers from a subsidiary called Whitmore Logistics. The money sums of $200,000, $500,000, sometimes $1 million was being siphoned off into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, called Blue Horizon Consulting. The signatory for Blue Horizon was buried deep, hidden behind layers of corporate veils. But Russell's investigators had found him. It was Trent. My brother had been treating the company's operating capital like his personal ATM, but it got worse. I opened a PDF labeled Unauthorized Guarantees. Trent had been signing deals with external developers, using the Whitmore family name as collateral. He had forged Russell's signature on letters of intent, effectively promising that if his risky ventures failed, Whitmore Meridian would foot the bill. He hadn't just stolen money. He had exposed the entire empire to catastrophic liability. If those deals went south, the creditors wouldn't come after Trent. They would come after the main holding company. They would come after me. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window. This was why they were so desperate for the guardianship. It wasn't just about Mark's debt. It was about covering up years of systemic fraud before I opened the books. I needed verification. I needed a human element. The next morning, I arranged a meeting with Silas Vance. Silas was 80 years old, a former senator, and the longest-serving member of the Whitmore Meridian Board of Directors. He was the only man Russell had ever spoken of with genuine respect. We met in the back of a dusty, leather-scented library at his private club. Silas looked like a tortoise, wrinkled, slow, but with eyes that were ancient and sharp. He sipped his whiskey and looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "You have your grandfather's chin," Silas grunted, "and his stubbornness, from what I hear." "I have his files," I said, cutting to the chase. "I know about Blue Horizon." Silas didn't blink. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. I suspected Russell knew. He stopped bringing Mark to the quarterly strategy meetings 2 years ago. He never said why. He just froze him out. "Why didn't he fire him?" I asked. "Because Russell believed in letting people hang themselves," Silas said. "He gave Mark enough rope. He just didn't expect Mark to use it to try and strangle the company." Silas leaned forward, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "Listen to me, girl. You won that hearing. Good for you. But do not think for a second that this is over. Mark is cornered. He is terrified. And Trent? Trent is a fool, which makes him dangerous. They are legally barred from the finances," I said. "Laws are just lines on paper to men like your father." Silas said, "They will not stop at the courts. They will try to break you. They will try to find a way to make you quit. They need that signature power back. Harper, without it, the auditors are going to find the unauthorized guarantees. When that happens, it is not just bankruptcy, it is federal prison." He looked me dead in the eye. "Watch your flank, and for God's sake, do not sign anything, not a birthday card, not a receipt, nothing." I left the club with my blood running cold. Silas was right. I wasn't dealing with family drama. I was dealing with criminals who happened to share my DNA. I went back to my apartment. I looked around at my mismatched furniture. My small kitchen. I could have moved into a penthouse at the Ritz that night. I could have hired a staff of 10. But I didn't want new people. New people were potential leaks. I called Valdez. "I need 24-hour coverage, and I need a background check on everyone who has cleaned this building in the last 5 years. Done, Valdez said. She didn't ask why. That was why I paid her. Then, the phone rang. It was my mother. Harper, Elaine said. Her voice was soft, devoid of the frantic energy she had shown outside the courthouse. Please, don't hang up. I held the phone away from my ear for a second. Looking at it, Russell's training kicked in. Listen to what they want you to do. Then look at what they are afraid of. What do you want? Mother, I asked. I want to apologize, she said. The court hearing it got out of hand. Your father was panic-stricken. We all were. We handled it wrong. We pushed you when we should have supported you. You tried to have me committed, I said flatly. I know, she whispered, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But Harper, we are a family. We are all hurting. I just want to see you. No lawyers, no Mark, no Trent, just you and me, mother and daughter, please. I paused. My instinct was to tell her to go to hell, but then I remembered the Blue Horizon file. I remembered Silas's warning. They are desperate. If I refused, they would keep plotting in the dark. If I accepted, I could look her in the eyes and see exactly how terrified they were. Dinner, I said. Tonight, 7 o'clock, at the Avery? The Avery is lovely, she said, her relief audible. Thank you. Harper, thank you. The Avery was neutral ground expensive, public, and busy. I arrived 5 minutes late on purpose. Elaine was already at a corner table. She was wearing a beige cashmere cardigan, looking softer, older, less armored than usual. She had ordered a bottle of white wine but hadn't touched it. When I sat down, she reached for my hand. I let her take it for a second before pulling back to place my napkin in my lap. You look tired, she said, her eyes scanning my face. I am working, I said. It turns out running a conglomerate takes more than just cashing checks. I know, she said quickly. That is what worries me. It is so much for one person. Your grandfather, he was a machine. You are human. Harper. We ordered. We made small talk. She asked about my apartment. She asked if I was seeing anyone. It was a surreal pantomime of a normal mother-daughter dinner, performed over a plate of $30 risotto. Then, the coffee arrived, and the performance shifted gears. Elaine reached into her purse. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a thin leather folder. I didn't want to bring this up, she began, her voice trembling with manufactured reluctance. But Mark is destroying himself with guilt. He knows he can't be your guardian. He accepts that. But the company, Harper the company, is in a fragile state. Is it? I asked, sipping my coffee. There are deals, she said. Complex deals that Russell set in motion years ago. They require authorized signatures from someone with tenure. The banks are getting nervous with a new owner. The stock is wobbling. She slid the folder across the table. This isn't a guardianship, she said. It is just a limited voting proxy. It authorizes Mark to handle the administrative maintenance of the existing contracts for 6 months. Just the old stuff. You keep the money. You keep the final say on new business. This just clears the backlog. It lets you breathe. I looked at the folder. It was the trap. They needed a signature, any signature. If I signed this proxy, Mark could use his administrative power to bury the Blue Horizon transfers. He could validate the unauthorized guarantees Trent had made. He could retroactively approve the theft. I didn't open the folder. I looked at Elaine. I saw the way her eyes darted to the folder and then back to my face. I saw the slight tremor in her hand as she held her coffee cup. I saw the beads of sweat along her hairline. Despite the restaurant being cool, they weren't just worried about the stock price. They were terrified of the audit. The mirror clause wasn't the only trap Russell had set. By filing for guardianship, Mark had triggered an automatic internal review. The forensic accountants were probably already chewing through the servers at Whitmore Meridian. Mark and Trent were racing against a clock that was ticking louder every second. You want me to sign this? I said slowly. To help the company. To help you, Elaine corrected, leaning in. So you don't have to worry about the boring details. You can just enjoy your life. Harper, you won. You have the billions. Why burden yourself with the paperwork? I see, I said. I picked up the folder. I felt the weight of it. Elaine held her breath. Her eyes were wide, hopeful, desperate. She thought she had me. She thought that the tired, overwhelmed daughter would take the easy way out. I will think about it, I said. Oh, she said, disappointment flashing across her face before she hid it. Of course, but the banks, they need an answer by Monday. If we delay, we might lose some critical financing. Monday, I repeated. I will let you know by Monday. I stood up. Thank you for dinner. Mother? Harper, she called out as I turned away. I really do miss you. I stopped. I looked back at her. She looked small in the big leather booth. I know, I said. But you missed the version of me that did what she was told. I walked out of the restaurant with the folder under my arm. I didn't intend to sign it. I intended to give it to Halstead. As I got into my car, where Valdez was waiting, I realized something. Russell was right. They hadn't changed. But the dynamic had. They used to ignore me because I was worthless to them. Now they were courting me because I was their only life raft. I opened the folder in the back seat. The document was dense, full of legal jargon. But on page 3, buried in a paragraph about operational continuity, was a clause that would have granted Mark retroactive indemnification for all financial decisions made in the last 2 years. He was trying to get me to sign his pardon. Where to? Valdez asked. The office. I said, I need to send an email to the auditors. At this hour. Especially at this hour, I said. My mother just confirmed that they are hiding something big, and I'm going to find it before Monday. The car pulled away into the night. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the hunter. And I could smell the blood in the water. Monday morning arrived with the subtle, grinding tension of a tectonic plate shifting. The atmosphere at the headquarters of Whitmore Meridian Holdings was not frantic panic and high finance is always silent, but it was heavy. The stock had dipped 4% in pre-market trading. In the world of billions, 4% is a bloodletting. The board of directors had called an emergency session. The official agenda was leadership transition and stability, but everyone knew the real title was, Is the heiress a liability? I arrived at the tower at 8 in the morning. I did not take the private helicopter my grandfather used to use. I took the sedan. I wore a charcoal gray suit, white shirt, no jewelry except a watch. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I did not look like a socialite. I looked like what I was, a compliance officer walking into an audit. The first battle happened before I even reached the elevator. In the lobby, a scene was unfolding that stopped the morning rush of employees in their tracks. Mark Whitmore was standing by the security turnstiles, his face a mask of indignation that was rapidly crumbling into rage. I am Mark Whitmore, he was saying, his voice echoing off the marble walls. I have been the chief operating officer of this company for 20 years. You cannot block my access. The head of security, a large man named O'Connell, who used to drive for Russell, stood impassively in front of the gate. I am sorry. Mr. Whitmore, your credentials have been revoked pending the internal review. The list comes directly from the late chairman's instructions. The chairman is dead. Mark snapped. I am here to address the board. I have critical information regarding the competency of the new majority shareholder. This is a matter of fiduciary duty. I walked through the revolving doors. The sound of my heels clicking on the floor was rhythmically precise. Mark turned. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed. He looked tired. The stress of the debt and the failing legal battle was etching deep lines around his mouth. Harper, he said, stepping toward me. Tell them I need to be in that meeting. If you go up there alone, the wolves will tear you apart. You do not know these men. You do not know how they operate. I stopped. I looked at the father who had once told me I was a bad investment. I know exactly how they operate. Mark, I said. They look for weakness, and right now, screaming in the lobby looks very weak. I am trying to save you, he hissed, lowering his voice. Trent released the dossier. The board has it. They know about your history, your credit score, the eviction notice from when you were 22. They are going to roast you. Take me up there. I can spin it. I can say it was a youthful indiscretion. I felt a cold spike of anger, but I tamped it down. Trent had dug up my struggles, the struggles they caused by cutting me off, and packaged them as evidence of financial incompetence. It was dirty, it was petty, and it was exactly what I expected. Go home, Mark, I said. Mr. O'Connell, please ensure the lobby is clear. I scanned my badge. The light turned green. I walked through the gate, leaving my father shouting impotently at the glass. The boardroom was on the 45th floor. It was a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston Harbor. 12 men and women sat around a table that cost more than my college education. They were the titans of industry CEOs, former senators, investment bankers. They turned as I entered. Their gazes were heavy, assessing. Silas Vance sat at the far end. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. Ms. Watson, said the chairman of the board. A man named Sterling Archer, no relation to Mark's lawyer, who had eyes like a shark. "Thank you for joining us. We have some concerning materials to review." He slid a thick spiral-bound document across the polished wood. The cover read, "Risk Assessment, the Watson Succession." I didn't open it. "I assume this was provided by my brother, Trent Whitmore." "It contains public records," Archer said, tapping a pen on the table. "It suggests a pattern of financial instability, missed rent payments, a checking account that was frequently overdrawn between 2015 and 2017, a credit score that, until recently, was below 600. He leaned back, interlacing his fingers. "Ms. Watson, we manage pension funds. We manage sovereign wealth. We cannot have a controlling shareholder who cannot manage a household budget." The room was silent. They were waiting for me to make excuses. They were waiting for me to cry, or to blame my parents, or to ask for help. I remained seated. I placed my hands flat on the table. "You are looking at a history of poverty," I said, my voice steady and projecting to the back of the room. "Not a history of mismanagement. Those overdrafts occurred because I was working 2 jobs to pay for night school while receiving 0 financial support. I paid every cent back, with interest." "It still speaks to a lack of liquidity management," one of the board members muttered. "Does it?" I asked. "Or does it speak to resilience? I survived on $12,000 a year. I know the value of $1 better than anyone in this room." I reached into my briefcase. "However, since we are discussing risk and mismanagement, I believe we should look at current events, not ancient history." I pulled out the preliminary report from the forensic audit Russell's team had started. I slid copies down the table. "While my brother was digging through my trash from 10 years ago," I said, "I was looking at the company's books from last month, specifically, a subsidiary called Whitmore Logistics." Archer picked up the report. He frowned. "What is this?" "That is a record of unauthorized wire transfers," I said, slipping into my professional persona, the compliance officer. "Over the last 18 months, $7 million has been moved from logistics to a shell corporation in the Caymans. The authorizing signature is an auto pen stamp of my grandfather, used 2 days after he was admitted to the hospital and incapacitated." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The boredom vanished. The condescension evaporated. This was no longer a family squabble. This was corporate fraud. "Who authorized the use of the stamp?" Silas Vance asked, his voice growling. "The digital trail leads to a terminal in the COO's office," I said. "Mark Whitmore's office." "This is speculation," Archer said, though he was reading the numbers rapidly. "A terminal login is not proof of guilt." "No," I agreed. "It is a risk indicator, just like the unauthorized guarantees I found in the Project Oakhaven files. $40 million of Whitmore Meridian leverage pledged to a failing real estate deal in Dubai. Signed by Trent Whitmore, who holds no executive authority to bind this company." I watched their faces. They were pale. 40 million was not a lot to them, but the lack of control was terrifying. If Trent could sign for 40, he could sign for 400. "Gentlemen and ladies," I said, standing up. "You called this meeting because you were worried I was a risk. You thought I was an overwhelmed girl who would crash the stock, but the reality is, I am the only person in this family who is not currently trying to loot this company to pay off personal debts." While the boardroom digested the poison I had just fed them, the war outside was escalating. My phone, which was vibrating silently in my pocket, was flooded with notifications. Mark's legal team had filed a new motion an hour ago. They were demanding an immediate psychological intervention, claiming that my refusal to sign the proxy was proof of paranoid delusions. Simultaneously, Elaine was on a morning talk show. I could picture it perfectly. She would be wearing pastel. She would be weeping. "We just want her back." She would say to the host, "This money is a curse. It destroyed my father-in-law's mind. And now it is taking my daughter. We don't care about the shares. We just want to make sure she doesn't hurt herself." It was a pincer movement. Mark squeezed from the legal side. Elaine squeezed from the moral side, and Trent squeezed from the financial side. They wanted to break me mentally so that I would sign the papers just to make the noise stop. Back in the boardroom, Archer looked up from the report. He looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't respect, not yet. It was calculation. "These allegations regarding Mark and Trent," Archer said, "if true, they constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. They could lead to criminal charges." "The forensic audit is ongoing," I said. "The mirror clause in my grandfather's will has triggered a full external review. Everything will come out. The question is, do you want to be on the side of the board that protected the looters, or the side that stopped them? If we move against Mark, a female board member asked, he will sue. He will claim wrongful termination. He will claim you are retaliating because of the guardianship case. Let him sue, I said. He cannot afford a lawyer for much longer. He is insolvent. Archer leaned back. Ms. Watson, this is a very aggressive stance for a new owner. Your parents, they are painting a very different picture in the press. They say they are fighting for your soul. I laughed. It was a short, dry sound that startled them. My soul is fine. Mr. Archer, I said. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. They are telling the world that family matters more than money. They are telling you that I am greedy, that I am hoarding the estate. I turned back to face them. I do not care about the yachts, I said. I do not care about the Hamptons house. I do not care about the $3.8 billion, except as a tool to keep this company standing. I placed my hands on the back of the chair. I am not fighting for money. I am fighting for the right to live without a leash. I am fighting for the right to make a mistake without my father calling it a mental illness. I am fighting for my autonomy. And if saving this company from their embezzlement is the price I have to pay for my freedom, then I will pay it. The room was quiet for a long time. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed very loud. Silas Vance cleared his throat. I move, Silas said, his voice raspy but strong, that the board acknowledges Harper Watson as the sole representative of the Class A shares. Furthermore, I move that we suspend Mark Whitmore's executive privileges pending the results of the audit. Seconded, said the woman who had asked about the lawsuit. Archer looked around the table. He saw the nodding heads. He saw the fear in their eyes, not of me, but of the liability Trent and Mark represented. The motion carries, Archer said. He looked at me. Ms. Watson, we will issue a statement supporting your leadership transition. We will also issue a memorandum to security. Mark and Trent Whitmore are to be considered external risks. They will be barred from company property. Thank you, I said. However, Archer added, his voice hardening, this audit must be conclusive. If you are wrong, if this is just a family vendetta dressed up as compliance, the board will turn on you. We protect the share price, Ms. Watson, not the person. I understand, I said. The numbers do not lie. Only people do. I left the boardroom 10 minutes later. I walked back to the elevator, my legs feeling slightly numb. I had walked into the lion's den and convinced the lions to eat the other tamer. As I stepped into the lobby, I saw that Mark was gone. O'Connell, the security chief, gave me a sharp nod. We escorted him out. Ms. Watson, O'Connell said. He was displeased. I can imagine, I said. I walked out to my car. The air outside felt different. It was still cold, still gray, but the crushing weight on my chest had lifted slightly. I had stripped them of their corporate power. They could no longer use the company as a shield or a weapon, but I knew it wasn't over. I had taken their shield, but they still had knives. As the car pulled away, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you won? But you just opened the box. Watch the news tonight. It was Trent. I looked at the screen, and then I deleted the message. They were cornered. They were desperate. And I was just getting started. I had won the boardroom, but the final battle would be in the one place they thought they owned the court of law, and I had one final card to play that they didn't even know existed. The silence I had fought so hard to achieve after the boardroom victory lasted less than 48 hours. When you corner a rat, it does not surrender. It throws itself at your throat. Mark and Trent knew they were bleeding out. They knew the audit was chewing through the company servers, eating its way toward their secrets. They understood that once the forensic accountants finished their work, they would not just be broke, they would be defendants in a federal fraud case. So they stopped trying to negotiate. They stopped trying to be subtle. They decided to burn the whole world down in hopes that I would die in the smoke. On Wednesday morning, a new legal filing landed on Arthur Halstead's desk. It was not a petition for guardianship based on mental incompetence. They had abandoned that strategy the moment the judge threw it out. This was something far more insidious. It was a motion for protection from undue influence. Mark's legal team had crafted a narrative that was terrifyingly plausible to the outside world. They claimed that I, Harper Watson, was a naive, estranged daughter who was being manipulated by a predatory legal and security team. They argued that Arthur Halstead and my security consultant, Valdez, were the ones actually running the company, using me as a figurehead to loot the estate. It was projection at its finest. They accused me of being a puppet because that is exactly what they wanted me to be. They are trying to sever your support system, Halstead said, tossing the filing onto his desk. If they can convince a judge that I am manipulating you, the court could appoint a neutral third-party conservator. That freezes the assets. That freezes the audit. It buys them time. Time to hide the money they stole, I said. Exactly, Halstead said. While Mark fought in the courts, Elaine took to the airwaves. I watched her that evening on a local Boston talk show. The lighting was soft. She wore a simple blue dress, looking every inch the heartbroken matriarch. She did not look angry. She looked terrified. I do not care about the money, Elaine told the interviewer, her voice trembling. I really don't, but I am a mother, and I know my daughter. Harper is sweet. She is simple. She has lived a quiet life. Now, suddenly, she is surrounded by these sharks, lawyers, security guards, consultants. They won't let us talk to her. They have cut her off from her family. She wiped a tear from her cheek. I just want to make sure she isn't being used. I lie awake at night terrified that when the money is gone, these people will dump her on the street, and she will have no one left. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She took my autonomy and framed it as victimization. She took my strength and called it weakness. The public ate it up. My phone, which I had foolishly left on for work calls, began to melt down. It wasn't just the media. It was the friends. People I hadn't spoken to in 15 years suddenly found my number. A girl who had made fun of my secondhand clothes in high school sent me a text. Hey girl, so proud of you. We should grab coffee. I have this amazing business idea for a nonprofit. A cousin from Mark's side of the family, a man I had met exactly twice, left a voicemail saying he was worried about my safety and needed $40,000 to pay off a misunderstanding with a loan shark so he could come protect me. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of insincerity. Every ring of the phone was a reminder that to these people, I wasn't a person. I was a lottery ticket. I was a walking ATM. I sat in my apartment, the blinds drawn. Valdez was standing by the window, watching the street. There is a news van parked down the block, she noted, and 2 paparazzi on motorcycles. Let them wait, I said. I am not going out. I felt a sudden, crushing wave of exhaustion. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I wasn't built for this. I was just a compliance officer. I liked quiet rooms and spreadsheets. I didn't want to fight a war every time I opened my front door. Then, my laptop chimed. It was a specific sound, a heavy digital thud that I had never heard before. I walked over to the desk. A window had opened on my screen. It was red. Protocol mirror activated. Trigger event. Filing of motion, 44B, undue influence. Status unsealed. I froze. The mirror clause. Russell had been more paranoid and more brilliant than even I had realized. He hadn't just anticipated a guardianship hearing. He had anticipated the specific legal maneuver of claiming undue influence. He knew that if they couldn't call me crazy, they would call me brainwashed. The filing Mark had submitted that morning had been the final key. By claiming I was being manipulated, he had unlocked the nuclear warhead. Halstead, I said, hitting the speakerphone. Check your email. I see it. Halstead's voice came through, sounding breathless. My God, it was automated. It went to the judge, the SEC, and the board of directors simultaneously. What is in it? I asked. I am opening the primary attachment now. Halstead said, It is an audio file. Harper, you need to listen to this. I clicked on the file on my own screen. The room filled with the sound of static, then the clearing of a throat. It was a sound that made my heart stop. It was Russell. This is Russell Whitmore, the voice said. It was strong, clear, recorded years ago, before the sickness took his breath. I am recording this statement in the presence of my attorney and a court-appointed psychiatrist. Today is October 14th, 2021. He paused. If this recording is being played, it means that my son, Mark, or my grandson, Trent, has filed a motion claiming that Harper Watson is being manipulated or controlled by her advisors. It means they are trying to invalidate her agency. I closed my eyes. It felt like he was in the room with me. Let me be clear, Russell continued, his voice hardening into the steel tone I remembered from our chess games. Harper Watson is the only person in this family who cannot be manipulated. That is why I chose her. Mark is weak, Elaine is vain, Trent is greedy. They are the ones who are easily controlled by their debts, by their ego, by their social standing. If they have filed this motion, Russell said, it is a confession. They are projecting their own crimes. They are accusing her of being a puppet because they are terrified she will cut their strings. Do not listen to them. Listen to the money." The audio ended. But that was just the opening statement. The file contained more. It contained the smoking gun that David, the whistleblower, had only hinted at. I opened a folder labeled The Shell Game. It was a trail of documents showing that Mark had not just borrowed money for the Dubai deal. He had created a shell company called Apex Holdings. He had then used forged board minutes from Whitmore Meridian to list Apex as a subsidiary of the main family trust. He had effectively mortgaged the family's reputation to secure personal loans. He had told creditors that Apex was backed by the full faith and credit of the Whitmore empire. If the creditors called those loans, they wouldn't just bankrupt Mark, they would have a legal claim to pierce the corporate veil and come after the main estate. Mark hadn't just been stealing cash, he had been selling the foundation of the house while we were all sleeping inside it. And then there was Trent. The final folder was labeled Vote Buying. It contained a series of emails from 2 weeks ago. Trent had been sloppy. He had been desperate. He had emailed a junior member of the board, a man named Henderson. Subject, the girl. Henderson, we need your vote on the competency hearing. If you back Mark's play to remove her, we guarantee you a seat on the executive committee and a 2% bump in your equity stake once we regain control. She is a temporary problem. We will fix it. Just give us the vote. It was bribery. Pure, documented, felony-level corporate bribery. I sat back in my chair. The room was silent, but my head was roaring. They were done. With these documents public, and they were public now, sitting in the inboxes of the SEC, and the judge, Mark and Trent were not just out of the company, they were going to prison. My phone rang again. It was Mark. I stared at the screen. He knew. The emails had gone out. He knew the mirror clause had just detonated his life. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then Elaine called. Then Trent. They were panicking. The rats were not attacking anymore. They were squealing. "Harper," Halstead said on the line. "We have them. The judge just emailed my clerk. She is convening an emergency session tomorrow morning to review the new evidence. She wants everyone there. This is it. This is it," I repeated. I should have felt triumphant. I should have popped a bottle of champagne. I had won. I had avenged the 18-year-old girl who was kicked out onto the street. I had protected the legacy, but I didn't feel triumph. I felt a heavy, cold clarity. "Halstead," I said, "prepare the filings. We are not just defending against the undue influence motion tomorrow." "What are we doing?" "We are filing for a permanent restraining order," I said, "and we are handing the fraud evidence to the district attorney in open court." "Harper, that will destroy them," Halstead said softly. "Mark will go to jail. Trent too. Elaine will be destitute." "They destroyed themselves," I said. "I am just the one signing the paperwork." I hung up. I walked into my bedroom. It was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights outside. I stood in front of the full-length mirror on the closet door. I looked at myself. I looked tired. My skin was pale, my eyes dark. But I stood straight. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like a puppet. I looked down at my hand, on my right ring finger. I wore a small gold band. It was the only thing I had kept from my childhood. It was a signet ring with the Whitmore crest, given to me by Mark when I turned 16, back when he thought I might still be useful to him. I had worn it for 16 years, even when I was poor, even when I hated them. I wore it. It was a reminder of where I came from. It was a tether to the idea that maybe, someday, I would be part of the family again. I twisted the ring. It was tight. My hands had grown stronger, rougher over the years. I pulled. It resisted for a second, catching on the knuckle, as if it didn't want to let go. I pulled harder, with a sharp intake of breath. The ring slid off. I held it in my palm. It felt heavy. It felt cold. It was just a piece of metal. It wasn't love. It wasn't family. It was just a brand. A mark of ownership that I had voluntarily worn for too long. I looked at my hand in the mirror. There was a pale strip of skin where the gold had been. A ghost of the ring. "Goodbye," I whispered. I didn't throw the ring across the room. I didn't flush it down the toilet. I simply placed it on the dresser, next to my keys and my spare change. It was just an object now. It had no power. I turned away from the mirror. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom. I would look my father in the eye while the prosecutors took him away. I would watch my mother realize that her tears no longer worked as currency. I wasn't afraid anymore. The siege was over. It was time for the execution. The final showdown did not happen in a boardroom or a back alley. It happened in the same sterilized, fluorescent-lit courtroom where this war had started. But the atmosphere was different this time. The air was not heavy with grief. It was brittle with the anticipation of violence. Mark and Trent sat on the left side of the aisle. They looked surprisingly confident, I realized, watching them arrange their notepads, that they truly believed their own lie. They had convinced themselves that I was a fragile, broken girl who had been kidnapped by a predatory legal team. They believed that if they could just get a judge to sign a piece of paper, they could rescue me, and more importantly, rescue the access to the bank accounts. Elaine sat behind them. She was wearing a soft gray suit today, opting for the aesthetic of the weary, concerned mother. She caught my eye and offered a sad, trembling smile. It was the kind of smile that begged for forgiveness while simultaneously sharpening a knife. I sat on the right, Arthur Halstead was next to me, Valdez was behind me. I did not smile back at my mother. I looked at the judge, a man named Justice Halloway, who had a reputation for hating time wasters. "We are here to hear the motion for protection from undue influence," Justice Halloway said, peering over his spectacles. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed." Mark's lawyer stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a flourish. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice dripping with synthetic empathy. "This is a tragic case. We have a young woman, Harper Watson, who has been isolated from her loving family for over a decade. Suddenly, she inherits $3.8 billion. Within weeks, she is surrounded by security guards. She is filing hostile motions against her own father. She is barricaded in her apartment. These are not the actions of a free woman. These are the actions of a woman under the thrall of advisors who are isolating her to drain her estate." He pointed an accusatory finger at Halstead. "We are asking the court to step in. We are asking for a neutral conservator to be appointed. We are asking to bring Harper home." It was a compelling story. If I were a stranger in the gallery, I might have believed it. Justice Halloway turned to us. "Mr. Halstead, your response." Halstead did not stand up immediately. He arranged his papers with agonizing slowness. When he finally rose, he did not look at Sterling. He looked at Mark. "Your Honor," Halstead said, "the petitioner claims that Ms. Watson is being manipulated. They claim their only interest is her well-being. They claim they want to protect her." Halstead picked up a single sheet of paper. "However," he continued, "we have compiled a timeline of every interaction between the Whitmore family and Miss Watson since the death of Russell Whitmore. There were 14 phone calls, 3 dinners, 2 emails, in every single instance, without exception. A document transferring financial control was presented for her signature within 20 minutes of the conversation starting." "That is circumstantial," Sterling interrupted. "Is it?" Halstead asked. "Then let us look at the evidence that was automatically filed with this court yesterday morning." Mark stiffened. He knew about the mirror clause, but he clearly did not understand the extent of what it had released. "When Mr. Whitmore filed this motion claiming undue influence," Halstead said, his voice hardening, "he triggered the final provision of Russell Whitmore's will. This provision released a sealed forensic audit of the family's dealings with the company." Halstead walked to the bench and handed a heavy binder to the judge. "Your Honor, if you turn to tab 4, you will see a series of wire transfers involving a shell company called Apex Holdings. You will see that Mark Whitmore used his future inheritance money he did not yet have to secure personal loans for a failed venture in Dubai. These loans are now in default." The courtroom went silent. I saw Mark's face turn the color of ash. "And if you look at tab 6, Halstead continued, relentless, "you will see an email chain between Trent Whitmore and a creditor, dated 2 days ago. In this email, Trent promises that, and I quote, 'Once we get the guardianship order, we will liquidate the bond portfolio to cover the margin call.'" Halstead turned to face the room. "They are not here to save Harper Watson," Halstead said. "They are here to rob her. They are using this court as a crowbar to break into a bank vault." "Objection," Sterling shouted, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "This is slander. These are unverified internal documents." "They are verified by the forensic accounting firm of Deloitte," Justice Halloway said, his eyes scanning the pages. His expression had shifted from boredom to cold fury. The judge looked up. He looked directly at Mark. "Mr. Whitmore," the judge said. "Stand up." Mark stood. His legs looked shaky. "You filed a sworn affidavit, stating that your daughter is mentally unstable and needs your protection," the judge said. "Yet, According to these documents, you are currently insolvent and facing allegations of corporate embezzlement. I have a simple question for you. Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. If you are so concerned about her mental health, the judge asked, his voice slicing through the air, why did your petition specifically ask for power of attorney over the voting shares? Why did you not simply ask for a medical proxy? Mark stammered. The estate is complex. It requires experienced hands. Experience? The judge repeated. You lost $300 million in 2 years. That is the experience you want to bring to the table. It was a bad market. Elaine cried out from the gallery. She stood up, her composure cracking. He did his best. You don't understand the pressure he was under. Sit down, Mrs. Whitmore, the bailiff warned. No, Elaine shouted, pointing at me. Her mask had fallen off completely. The soft, grieving mother was gone. In her place was the woman who had watched me pack my bags at 18 with cold indifference. This is her fault. She is doing this to spite us. She hates us because she wasn't good enough. If she had just been obedient like Trent, none of this would be happening. The room froze. Even Sterling, their lawyer, closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. Elaine had just admitted it. It wasn't about my safety. It was about my obedience. She had just confirmed, on the record, that my value to them was entirely conditional on my submission. Mother, Trent hissed, grabbing her arm. Shut up. Do not tell me to shut up, Elaine screamed, hysteria taking over. We are going to lose everything because she is selfish. She doesn't need that money. She doesn't even know how to spend it. Your Honor, Trent said, standing up, trying desperately to salvage the Titanic as it snapped in half. My mother is emotional. Please, the point remains that Harper is not equipped to handle the strategic direction of the company. We have a plan, a temporary plan to stabilize the stock. We just need control for 6 months, just to calm the markets. Justice Holloway looked at Trent. A temporary plan to control the stock, so you admit that the goal of this guardianship is financial control, not medical care. Trent froze. He realized, a second too late, that he had just walked into the trap. I meant, Trent stuttered, I have heard enough, Justice Holloway said. He slammed the binder shut. The sound was like a gunshot. The motion for protection from undue influence is denied, the judge ruled. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented regarding the Apex Holdings transfers and the unauthorized guarantees, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for an immediate criminal investigation into fraud and embezzlement. Your Honor, please, Mark begged, clutching the table. I am also issuing a permanent restraining order, the judge continued, ignoring him. Mark Whitmore, Elaine Whitmore, and Trent Whitmore are hereby barred from coming within 500 feet of Harper Watson. They are barred from contacting her, her employees, or any member of the Whitmore Meridian Board. He banged his gavel. This court is adjourned, and Mr. Whitmore, I suggest you don't leave town. I believe the authorities will want to speak with you shortly. The chaos that followed was absolute. Reporters who had been sitting quietly in the back rushed forward. Mark collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Trent was shouting at Sterling. Elaine was sobbing, but nobody was looking at her with sympathy anymore. They were looking at her like she was a spectacle. I stood up. I felt incredibly light. It wasn't happiness. It was the absence of weight. The burden I had carried since I was 18, the burden of wondering if I was wrong, if I was unlovable, if I was the problem had evaporated. I walked toward the exit. I had to pass them to get out. Mark looked up as I approached. His eyes were red, rimmed with the desperation of a man who sees the prison bars closing in. Harper, he croaked. Harper, you can't let them take me. I am your father. I stopped. I looked at him. I looked at Elaine, who was staring at the floor. I looked at Trent, who was still trying to blame his lawyer. You are not my father, I said calmly. You are just a man who made a bad investment. We gave you life, Elaine wailed. And then you billed me for it, I said. I looked at all three of them one last time. You think you lost the money because of me, I said, my voice steady enough to cut through the noise of the courtroom. But you didn't. You lost the money years ago when you decided that family was a business transaction. You lost your power because you used love as chains, and the thing about chains is, eventually, they rust. I turned away. Goodbye, I said. I walked through the swinging doors of the courtroom. The hallway was crowded. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust in my face. Questions were shouted. Harper, how do you feel? Are you pressing charges? What happens to the company? I ignored them all. Valdez cleared a path for me, her broad shoulders parting the sea of media. We reached the heavy glass doors at the entrance of the courthouse. Valdez pushed them open. The air outside was cold. It was the crisp, biting cold of a Massachusetts winter. It hit my face like a slap, waking up every nerve ending in my body. I stepped out onto the concrete steps. I stopped. I was alone. I had no parents. I had no brother. I had no ring on my finger. I had $3.8 billion and a company to run. But in this moment, those things felt abstract. What felt real was the silence in my head. The voices that had told me I wasn't enough were gone. The fear of the phone ringing was gone. The need to prove myself to people who couldn't see me was gone. I looked up at the sky. It was a piercing, cloudless blue. I closed my eyes and inhaled. I filled my lungs until they ached. I held the air there, tasting the cold, tasting the city, tasting the absolute, terrifying, beautiful freedom of it. Then, I exhaled. I opened my eyes. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I didn't look back at the ruins of my family. I looked forward, at the street, at the cars, at the wide-open world. I walked down the steps, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the pavement. I had a lot of work to do, but for the first time in my life, the work was mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, justice, and the ultimate price of greed. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or relaxing at home? Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with others. And if you enjoyed Harper's journey, please make sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this story with even more people. Your support means the world to us.